Welcome to the cocktail journey. Thanks for joining us for daiquiris. Thanks to all of you who said that you're here. Thanks for your feedback, Diane. And it's wonderful to see you all. Just bump your volume up, and we're going to work on this for the next live stream. Until then, enjoy the visual presentation of this beautiful cocktail. And Daniel, we will get to your question about the Paloma, which will totally be allowed towards the end. So the way that we're doing our live streams, we're adding a little bit more structure to it, just to give you an idea of what to expect. The first half, or the first 20 minutes or so, we're going to talk about just like the best classic version of the cocktail of the hour. And the focus of this the cocktail of the week, yep, and we'll be chatting about this hour. And today's the daiquiri. And so the goal in this first section is how do we talk about making like the best version of a daiquiri? Because we really believe that there's something really beautiful and significant about making a simple cocktail exceptionally well. So we're going to talk all about the tips and the tricks and things that can go wrong with a daiquiri, or where it's forgiving, and things from ingredients and that sort of thing. Technique. Stefan's here.
Hey,
I didn't even introduce you. You're such a you're just like our anchor guest here.
I just usually just stand here in the corner, and when they need me, I just jump into the scene. Yes, there I am. Hi, everybody. Stefan, once again, back on the cocktail journey.
I'm Rachel Eva. This is Stefan Kurpinsky. We've been working together for a little while, and I'm the founder of Standard Spoon Barware, together with Sean Michael, who's behind the camera. And the cocktail journey has sort of been a really beautiful evolution of our journey in designing and crafting high-quality bar tools. Stefan's been around for 20 years.
20 plus years behind the stick.
Yep.
Cocktail nerd, and a lot of real world training, as well as book training, book smarts. So I've been focused for the last 20 years on how to balance a cocktail, and I've learned a few things along the way. Happy to share it with y'all.
So let's dive right in.
Okay, the daiquiri?
The daiquiri.
The daiquiri. Cool. Let's make one first, and then we can talk way more about it. I think Tom had asked a question about rum, and we're going to definitely get into rum. I would suggest using a light rum, a Cuban-style rum, if you can get one. But we actually don't have one, so we're actually going to use an aged rum today. We'll stay with the Cuban style. We'll use the Bacardi Ocho, which is an 8-year aged product out of the Bacardi outfit, which is in Puerto Rico these days, but it originated in Cuba. So go ahead and grab your rum.
Cuba or Cuba?
Cuba.
Yeah, we're out of light rum. Rum doesn't stick around our bar for very long.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't at my house either. Cool. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and talk about specs. A daiquiri is a classic sour, and in saying that, there's two general methods of making a sour, two different recipes. There is a classic East Coast, what I call the East Coast style, which is 2 ounces of spirit and 3/4 ounce of fresh citrus and 3/4 ounce of sugar syrup, 1-to-1 simple syrup ratio. And then the West Coast style, in my opinion, we bump up our citrus a little bit more. We just love it a little bit more bracing cocktail out here. That would be 2 ounces of spirit, 1 ounce of fresh citrus, and then 3/4 ounce of the syrup if you're choosing. So for the daiquiri, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a 2-1 3/4 because that's absolutely my favorite. I like a little bit drier, a little bit more astringent cocktail sour. And we're definitely going to get into rum styles in a little bit, Daniel, so just hang in there. Cool. So the first thing we'll do, I usually start with fresh citrus. We'll go ahead and do 1 ounce of fresh lime juice. We juice this right before the live stream. I suggest juicing your citrus anywhere from an hour to 3 hours before you're about to make the drink, all the way up till right at the time you're making your drink. Anything longer than about 3-4 hours, you're going to start losing freshness. A lot of acidity will get lost, and it'll start becoming more and more astringent and bitter. If you've got a dinner party going, by all means, feel free to use it longer into the evening. The great thing about drinking late into the evening is that people's taste buds kind of lose their edge, and so does your brain. So don't worry about what it tastes like at midnight. And then we'll go ahead and do 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup, like so, and then 2 full ounces of the rum of your choosing, Cuban style rum if you've got it. Barbados also makes some really great rums in that similar style, that kind of Spanish style, which we'll get into in a minute.
And if you are holding off on making a daiquiri because you really want to learn more about rums, just don't.
Yeah.
Use whatever rum you have.
Use what you got. Yeah.
Use whatever one you're feeling in the moment, because this is essentially just a rum sour, and so any rum spirit is going to just be delicious in this drink.
Yeah, when we get into history, we're going to talk about how there's so many similar cocktails in the same style, just all from different rum producing regions. Great. I'm going to shake this cocktail, which means we're going to probably have to be a little bit more silent.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go ahead and add our ice, and we'll go ahead and shake this cocktail.
I love that sound.
Ooh, nice and cold, extra cold.
You see how the tin is all frosty on the outside?
Yeah, that's a good sign. That's a sign that you've shaken it hard enough and long enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to fine strain this cocktail because I like to get all the little ice chips out. That way you're not going to over dilute the drink as it's sitting.
Mm-hmm.
This is looking nice.
Do you always double strain your daiquiris?
I double strain my daiquiris. I don't like all those little ice chips in there. Like I said, it's a textural thing, but it's also you just worked really hard to get an optimum amount of dilution, and now you're going to let all those little ice chips, which are really easy to get melted into the drink, to be a bit more. It'll be a little over diluted, I guess, at that point.
And then the other thing too, just from a point of like another tip that we learned during the Paloma, is that Stefan likes to remove the pulp from all of his juice before he puts it in these little decanters. But if you squeeze your lime straight into the jigger or whatever to measure it, double straining will actually remove a little bit of that pulp too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really important too. If you're not straining all your juices before you put them in your cocktail shaker, you can still strain it all out at the end. My issue with keeping the pulp in there, if you've pre-juiced, you're not going to actually accurately be able to measure the amount of lime juice, because you're actually measuring lime and pulp, and the pulp takes a lot of volume. So yeah, so it's a little less scientific.
Less potent with pulp.
Right. So here is your very classic Cuban style daiquiri.
So beautiful.
This is what it should probably look like. A nice little bit of frothiness on top from the shake. So a little different discolor, different color, that lighter color on top. And we're garnishing it with a little lime wheel that have a courtesy slit in it. That's what that's called in the world. You just go ahead and get a little slit. That way it fits right on. We call it courtesy. That way, we call it that because in the bar world, the person who preps for the day is being courteous to whoever's closing or whoever's working the shift by putting that cut in there already pre-cut. So anyways, cheers you all. I hope you enjoy your cocktail.
Enjoy your daiquiri. Both Sarah and Kelsey were curious about spiced rums and how is a spiced rum daiquiri. It's
spicy. That's exactly that's the main difference.
And that's one of the things that we love about like very, very simple and classic cocktails, where this is lime, sugar, and rum. And so this, very similar to say an old fashioned, which is whiskey, bitters, and sugar, is a drink where you can really, like, if you're experimenting with different spirits, those come through really well.
Right.
You have, you make a daiquiri with a white rum, and then you make a daiquiri with an aged rum. And you're going to really taste that flavor of the aging of the rum come out. At the same time, the daiquiri is a beautiful cocktail because if you've got kind of maybe a not so great rum, that's where the citrus and the sugar comes in and just smooths it over for you.
100%.
So
kind of getting, now that we all have a cocktail to enjoy, right? So we finally have that going for us. We can actually get a little bit deeper into this drink, kind of its origin story, where it comes from, and kind of drinks that are in and around that's the same style, that literally carry the same idea of rum, lime, and sugar. It's what we call the holy trinity of cocktails in the Caribbean. Depending on what island that rum is from and what island you're on or what region you're in, that drink can be something completely different, yet very similar. They all come from the same tree, right? We call it the holy trinity of rum, lime, and sugar. So This one is obviously Cuban of origin, but if you use Martinique-style rum, or HUM, you have, and you use lime and sugar, you have a tea punch. If you're in Jamaica, that's a planter's punch. So there's 100 different ways to do this, right? They all have slightly different names, slightly different preparation, slightly different flavor, but they're all equally super delicious. So when you're talking about the daiquiri, it gets its origin story, of course, just outside of the little mining town of Daiquiri in Santiago de Cuba, like right next to that. There was an old miner who, he wasn't actually a miner. He was an American mining manager who was down there, and he had some friends over for a little dinner party, and he had a planter's punch in Jamaica, or had heard of it. So he thought, why not use the local rum, the Cuban rum, lime, just a touch of sugar. He actually almost swizzled it in a tall glass with pebble ice and served that to his friends, and they called it the daiquiri. So that was its original concept, and obviously it's been refined. When it got to Havana, it became more of this style of like classic sour preparation. You see this drink really starting to explode during the American Prohibition era in the 1920s, 1930s. You had a lot of drinking tourists from America that would go abroad to be able to drink legally and have a bar experience. Kind of like what we think of now with COVID. Like we all are pining for that day we can go back to the bar and have that experience, right? It's like essential to American social, social network and society. So it was something they did. I guess we just got louder, by the way. But it was something that we would do, right? Americans, we'd go to Tijuana, we'd go to Mexico to drink margaritas and what have you, and we were drinking a lot of daiquiris, sloppy joes, mojitos. In Cuba, in Havana, it was a big American tourist city, just being right off the coast of Miami. It became a very popular thing. It was brought back to the Prohibition speakeasy bars because it could be made with really terrible rum, with enough lime and sugar. You're going to make anything taste pretty decent and well balanced. So that's kind of where this cocktail came from. After that era, you have the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, where things just got cocktails kind of fell off from their original historic recipes to something completely different. And that's where you're probably thinking of the very like slushy, blendy daiquiri, something like you'd see on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. The daiquiri kind of evolved, right? Partly that was being done in Cuba, in Havana, at some of these places that it would get really hot. You want a really ice cold drink, just throw it in a blender. Mm-hmm. That was a very mid-century thing to do when you have access to like modern like kitchen equipment. So people would start blending their daiquiris. So this really became reimagined and rediscovered in the early 2000s with the second cocktail renaissance in New York and Chicago. And it's absolutely still one of bartenders' favorite cocktails. It's like an industry cocktail for sure. And if you ever ask a bartender what they think of a daiquiri, their eyes will probably light up and go, "Oh my goodness, let me tell you, yeah," because it's just so basic and simple and elegant, mm-hmm. and instantly crushable. It's a great happy hour cocktail. I've always had it on my happy hour menus because we can't just order one. It's like a margarita, right? You end up ordering 3.
Yep.
Yeah.
I had a couple of comments. I'm glad you touched on the frozen daiquiri, mm-hmm. because we had a couple of folks who said, I think Carl said, "Am I the only cocktail moron who thought a daiquiri was a blended, icy, sugary mess?" No. And we've started a new trending hashtag called #I'mWithCarl because I feel like this is not unique to Carl's situation.
No, I go every bar I've ever worked at, and I've put a daiquiri on the menu or a daiquiri variation. People have always been like, "Oh, daiquiri, like that's terrible." I'm like, okay, maybe just try this, Mm-hmm. But that is absolutely a thing. Kind of like the espresso martini. Like people are like, "Oh, it's one of those sweet, cocktails from the 90s." It's like, actually, no, it's not. It's actually a dry, bitter cocktail from the 80s. But it's funny how cocktails will evolve over time as tastes change, as techniques change. Mm-hmm. But generally, what happened to our cocktails in the mid-century, like threw them way out of balance. They were definitely sweeter. They were made with less fresh ingredients. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then after this second cocktail renaissance, we've been able to bring some of the elegance and history back to the cocktails.
Yeah. Sean, didn't you Didn't you have Dave Stolte turn you into a daiquiri? Was daiquiri the one? I don't know where you put that. We have a friend.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I was like turned you onto it. Like, was he the first one? Oh no, he like literally drew Sean as a daiquiri. Yeah, fair.
So we have Dave Stolte, who's the author of Home Bar Basics. He just released the 3rd edition of his book, and Sean's.
I haven't.
Dave Stolte. You haven't?
No, I mean, it would be hard pressed to pick one cocktail to draw me. You'd have to like draw me as a cocktail book. It'd be a book. Yeah. Cool. So, should we get into rums and like all that stuff? Are we ready for that?
I have a question that John's hinting at, which is like, where can you screw up on a daiquiri?
Okay. Yeah, I think like any other sour, if you don't balance the citrus against the sweet and the booze, obviously that's your first thing. So I would recommend sticking really close to either of those two specs I mentioned, whether it's 2 1 3/4 or 2 3/4 3/4. If you get down to a 1 1/2 3/4 3/4, now that cocktail isn't boozy enough. It's a little too diluted. If you go higher with the booze, it ends up being really boozy. If you don't use enough citrus, it's just going to be sweet and boozy. So that's the first thing I would mention is stick as close as you can to those measurements and really, make sure you're getting those measurements right with that beautiful, meniscus pores. And then the second thing is obviously, like I'm going to obviously you guys are going to get tired of me talking about this, but dilution, and obviously the temperature. I think those two things are extremely important to enjoying your cocktail and to get as close as you can get to like ultimate perfection, like you'd have at Death and Company or one of these amazing cocktail bars around the world. So yeah, you want to make sure you're using fresh ice, not stuff that's been sitting around and really wet, right? So straight from your freezer.
Really cold ice.
Make sure you chill your glass first, and then make sure you're filling your cocktail shaker all the way up to the brim with that ice. That way, you're gonna chill that drink as fast as possible. And then you definitely want to make sure you're putting your back in your whole body into that shake, so that you're really getting it nice and cold. You're aerating that cocktail properly. You want to use like cocktail cubes, like 1 inch by 1 inch cubes or something like that. And if you don't have that, if you have smaller cubes, make sure you're shoving as much ice into that shaker as you can possibly.
You don't want the ice swimming around in the cocktail.
No, yeah, you want
the cocktail like trying to make its way through the ice.
Right, because there's definitely a relationship between temperature and dilution, right? And I mean, obviously, alcohol will just burn ice. It's really good at melting ice, but you want to get when you're shaking or you're stirring, you want to get to an optimal level of temperature as fast as possible to slow down the dilution ratio to give you time to aerate the cocktail. So that's kind of how that all works.
Did you mention the chilling of the glass?
Yes, okay. I did. And then, like I said, you can buy a tea strainer really easily through cocktail bar companies, what have you. Or you could usually go to your local grocery store, like tea strainers. It doesn't have to be this really big fancy basket. It can be a smaller one. But yeah, something like this with a nice small mesh is going to get all the ice chips out of your cocktail, but also all the pulp and anything else that could potentially make for a less than spectacular cocktail. So yeah, highly recommend fine straining your sours. And then something I like to do, I didn't do with this one, I salt all of my sours because I think your palate expects a little bit of salinity when you're tasting anything. So usually on all my bar stations, I'll have a little bit of kosher salt just lying around. You definitely don't want iodized salt. So yeah, you just give it a little pinch in there, or you can make a 1 to 5 ratio saline solution, 5 parts water to 1 part salt, and just have that like in a dasher bottle, just to give it a couple dashes into any of your sours, and you're gonna end up with something really tasty. Oh, thanks.
Hi.
This is better ice or better
salt.
Better salt right there.
We have like 6 kinds of salt.
That's kosher salt.
Oh, that's the kosher stuff there.
That's the mortar part. No, that's the mortar part. Right, the pestle's the one that goes in the mortar.
What happens if you pre-make a batch?
Yes.
I love freezer cocktails. I recommend doing that for sure and trying that, and maybe starting with something that's not doesn't have citrus in it. Because like I said, citrus won't last forever. It won't stay at its really optimum like brightness and flavor.
But if you're doing it for later in the afternoon,
yeah, you absolutely can. I would go, but I would definitely pre-dilute that cocktail as well. That way, literally all you have to do is pour it straight in. You won't get the aeration, which is like this really amazing part of a shaken cocktail. But you can absolutely have something that's really tasty. You could serve it on ice. You could add soda on top of it. But I would add 30% water to dilute that down to like optimum drinking.
So if you're gonna make a daiquiri, if you're gonna pre-make a batch, but you're not gonna shake it, you're just gonna put the rum and the lime.
Right. Yeah. You can just pour it over rocks. But if you wanted to shake it later, yeah, absolutely, pre-make it.
But if you didn't want to shake it, the 30% dilution is you would do the rum and the simples and the lime and add water and then just stick it in the freezer.
But if you wanted just to pre-batch everything, I wouldn't put it in the freezer though, because it's gonna get like it's gonna kind of get
slushy.
frozen. Yeah, it's gonna get really frozen. I would just put it in the fridge because you're still gonna shake it. So there's two ways to do it, right? Freezer cocktails. Which actually would be really cool because it'd be kind of slushy, which is, like everybody loves it, like a slightly slushy daiquiri. So yeah, you can pre-dilute it, put it in a bottle, and put it in your freezer, and that's really delicious. Or if you want to shake it later, you can just pre-batch the 2 parts, 1 part, 3/4 part, and into a bottle, and then just pour right. You don't even have to, jigger it or measure it. You can just pour it straight into a cocktail shaker, add your ice, shake it. And then just lay all your glassware out for all your guests.
You got to be careful sometimes with this dilution, though. There was one time when we were really excited about cocktails. We were young in the cocktail world, and we pre-batched margaritas. And we had a pitcher of margarita. We were like, we'll have a pitcher of margaritas. It'll already be made for our guests that come over. However,
it didn't work out. Like it sounds like a great idea.
We didn't dilute it up front. We just put all the ingredients in. We put it in a pitcher. We put it in the fridge. You pull it out of the fridge. It's already nice and cold. And then when we poured it over ice, because it was so cold, the ice didn't dilute it as much. And
so it was really strong. And you guys were like just chucking.
And it was a pitcher, and people.
Yeah. I would maybe sneak in a little dilution if you're gonna have a party and friends are coming over.
Do you remember that, Sean?
I highly recommend making a punch or something lower ABV. That way, conversation will be tight and fun for a longer amount of time.
We'll get into punches at some point.
Later in the evening after dinner, then it goes to straight spirits and everybody gets a little sauce and everybody takes a cab or Uber home. But before dinner, you really want to keep conversation lively. You want people to be coherent. So a little extra dilution doesn't hurt, but that's a little bit on pre-batching. We should talk about rum. I think that's absolutely essential.
Can we talk about limes first?
Let's talk about limes. What would you like to talk about?
Just because I think that we could go down the rabbit hole on rum.
Yeah, and then by then we'll be like, oh, we're done.
We had a couple of lime questions.
Sure.
One was, I think, way up there. One of the Johns, maybe. Sorry to lump you guys together. Was asking about John Schmid. I find the ratio of citrus to sugar has to vary based on the citrus of the moment. Do you find that also to be true? Does it have to do with the quality of the citrus or the level of oxidation?
Well, I mean, obviously you shouldn't expose your limes to air.
Don't expose your limes.
Yeah, only cut them right before you're going to juice them. Don't cut one, save half of it in your freezer or your fridge, and then bring it back for a cocktail later. That's not going to be a good drink. But obviously, there is some variation on species of limes, where they're grown. I feel like Florida and San Diego or California have a pretty similar citrus fruit selection, but it is a little different. I don't know. I haven't spent enough time on the East Coast to really be able to delve into that, but that's probably partly the reason why East West Coast kind of have slightly different recipes.
I don't know what this variation of lime is called, but this is
American.
The lime that we get very commonly at our store.
Right.
There was a question about key limes are a lot smaller, and they will have a different flavor, and they'll impart a different
key limes aren't even all that juicy. But I think
I think what you're talking
about, if you're talking about small limes, you're thinking about Persian limes, which are the ones that you see at taco shops and stuff like that. Those are like the limon verdes. Those are limon from Mexico. They're called Persian limes, but they're a little more acidic, and there's less fruit. But and I would adjust it, right? So if you made a 2, 1, 3/4 daiquiri, and you're like, oh, it's really bright on acidity. then try the 2 3/4 method, and you'll probably be right on.
Mm-hmm.
You also want to make sure if you're making simple syrup, I think we've probably discussed this a few times, but if you really want to dial in your simple syrup, you're going to need to buy or use your gram scale so that you're really getting an accurate, equal measurement between sugar, which is, it's not a liquid, right? It's a solid, and water, which is a liquid. And those two things, obviously, the sugar granules are going to have a lot of air around them. So if you're just eyeballing that, that's actually not a good way to get an equal part for a syrup.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to use grams, at least now you're using like to like, apples to apples. And that'll really
Mm-hmm.
help you dial that in. Who knows? That might be what it is. That might be the difference, for you. That's a good thing to think of.
Some other tips for sourcing limes at the store. I always look for big limes because I'm going to get more juice out of it than like the smaller, say like the Persian limes.
Especially if you're going to a store that they charge you by the lime.
They do like $3 for $1.
Yeah,
maybe
like
where you are
biggest,
it's $2 for $1.
Juiciest ones you can get, and feel them too, because some of them are like rock hard. There's no juice in those. Move right on. Throw them right away. You want them to be a little squishy.
Mm-hmm. And the thinner the skin, sometimes the thin skin ones have more juice in them.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about lemons, we actually buy 2 different kinds of lemons at our bar. We buy lemons for juicing, and we buy lemons for the peel. And so when you're looking at it, we mostly just use limes for the juice. And so it's okay, with lemons we talk about, if you're looking for a lemon peel garnish, you want like a nice, thick, bumpy rind on that lemon. It's going to have a lot of citrus oils in the surface. But if you're looking to juice a bunch of limes for cocktails or Trinity, which is, one of our...
Okay, now I'm hungry.
I know. We're talking food now.
The other thing
then you want to look for like those thin rind
Yep.
limes that you would never peel for a cocktail are going to be really, really great for juicing because they're just so soft. You can almost like squeeze the juice out of them.
And if you're trying to like get as much length out of your citrus as possible, get them at room temperature before you juice them. They'll definitely be juicier. To be honest, like citrus shouldn't even be in the fridge unless you're really trying to deep store it. Like the best citrus I've ever had, like come off the trees and you use it and it's never touched.
Even if it's a little warm, you know, like sitting in the sun or something, it's going to be fine. It will make it not last as long. And so if you need to extend the length of your limes, we keep some citrus in the fridge just because we want it to last for a while because we buy a lot at once. If it's got brown spots on it, if it's got brown spots to the part where the skin is like hard, it's like the juice is just shriveling on the inside, you don't want to be around that lime. This one's got a tiny little brown spot right there that you can't even see.
You can see it now.
It's fine.
It's fine. Use
it's fine. It's on the outside of the lime.
If it's like turning white, throw it away. If there's
something else going on with that
If there's bugs
lime
floating around it, just throw the whole batch away. There's a couple of really great questions I do want to get to as well before we get into rum. One is, yes, if you're trying to optimally make pre-batched drinks, taste them really, make them taste really good when your guests arrive. You are absolutely right. Whoever mentioned that, it is best practice to not add the citrus until you make it. So you can add the sugar in the syrup. Then you would jigger that or measure that to 1 or 2 ounce or like 1 3/4 ounce, and then you would add your citrus in right before you shake it. That's by far the more optimal way to do it. But if you're you want to get everything ready for your guests when they arrive and you don't want to be shaking cocktails, you don't want to do that stuff, by all means, like I always say, I'm not going to tell you how to make cocktails in your house. I'm just going to give you some tips to make them better if you want to. You want those tips. And then there was another great question that just came up. Just about nomenclature, right? Yeah, so this is a daiquiri, right? Because it's got a Cuban style rum, lime and sugar. If it's Martinique style rum, it's a tea punch. It's technically made a little bit different, but it's also got rum, lime and sugar. Use gin. Gin, citrus and sugar is a gin sour. If you use honey instead of simple syrup, it's a bee's knees. If you use whiskey, it's a whiskey sour. You can go on down the list. Like nomenclature on cocktails, you may have one micro change of the cocktail, and it's another very classic cocktail. And that's something they mentioned that they're kind of new to cocktail making. That was something that took me forever to learn. Right? It's like, a sidecar is a margarita, right? But you just switch out the base spirit for tequila. that's something that's really fun, and it's an easy way to make a new cocktail. Like once you've learned all the tips and tricks to make a daiquiri really good, now you have the whole sour family, right? The whole family tree around sours. You've got that all dialed in. Just switch the spirit.
A couple others. I think that we had. Yeah, we've addressed some of those things. So daiquiri with whiskey is a whiskey sour. Yep. Eric says, here in Portland, one of our daiquiri bars, Palomar, makes their standard daiquiris with a 2 3/4 1 ounce spec, a half ounce, which is also delicious and highlights the rum a bit more.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You can also rum blend. That's something that's really great about rum. I need to talk about rums, but
yes,
you can
let's
rum
talk about
blend.
rums.
Should we make another cocktail first?
Let's make the Hemingway Daiquiri.
Cool. Let's make a Hemingway Daiquiri for anybody who hasn't made that before.
We've had a couple of people who said, it's a very easy drinkable drink, and so if you drank your drink as fast as I typically drink my daiquiris, you've been waiting for your next one, or you've already moved on to your second or third cocktail while we've been talking about lime. So Hemingway Daiquiri.
All right, so the Hemingway Daiquiri. So obviously, like I mentioned, the daiquiri is from Cuba, and during the early part of the last century, Havana was a huge boom town for travel, tourism, especially from America, especially because of the prohibition of alcohol sale in the States. But you had a lot. Then you also after that, you had a lot of Americans just go down there to get away from the bustle of American life. There was a very famous writer, Ernest Hemingway, who spent a lot of time in Cuba. He would go to this bar, but he couldn't drink daiquiris because there was too much sugar. He actually he couldn't drink sugar. He had an affliction, right? He was diabetic. So he actually ordered a drink they called the Papa Double, which was renamed for him because he drank it so much. And at this bar, there's still, like, at his stool, there's a statue of him now drinking an Ernest Hemingway Daiquiri. But it's a very simple play on the classic daiquiri. It's drier, it's a bit more tart, but it carries a very similar style. It's actually almost a bit more of a daisy, technically, which we've discussed with the sidecar. But let's go ahead and do it. It's got the name daiquiri, so you're in the ballpark. We're gonna do 3/4 ounce of fresh lime juice, and then we're gonna do a half ounce of fresh ruby red grapefruit juice. This is really beautiful grapefruits right here.
I told you we went back for more.
Oh man, so good. And then a half ounce of simple syrup, or no, not simple syrup. I take that back. We're gonna use maraschino, which is right here. That is the difference between this and a daiquiri. Technically, is we're using the sugar of this, which is a lot less than simple syrup, and some of the natural sugars in the grapefruit to kind of brighten and balance the drink. We're going to use a half ounce.
And yes, it is a very tart drink. So if you're somebody who likes really sweet drinks, make yourself another daiquiri right now.
Yeah, don't
try a different rum, or maybe try the East Coast version. I'm
just going to mess around with this Diplomatico for 2 ounces of this. But feel free, you can use a Cuban style rum, once again, a nice clean white rum, either Bacardi works really well, or something like Real McCoy 3-year. We're going to get into the rum game in just a minute, but this is a more aged rum from Venezuela? Yeah, Venezuelan rum. Cool, and I'm going to add just that pinch of salt in there to kind of balance off some of that tartness. Grab some ice.
You could do like one of the John said and add a few drops of a saline solution if you're into that.
Yeah, you can also add in a bar spoon of simple syrup. Don't feel like you can't. You don't have the same affliction that Ernest Hemingway had.
That's right. One of the cool things about drinking at home, one of the cool things about making cocktails at home, you could follow this recipe and then you can taste it right out of the shaker before you pour it in your glass and see if you're going to like it. And if it's too tart for you, add a little bit of simple, give it another shake, and then strain it in. You can, at the bar, they straw test, which you can do.
Yeah, so one of the things about classic cocktail recipes is that they need to be adjusted for modern palates, just like they were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s for more sweet tooths that we had at the time. We don't tend to drink really, really dry cocktails anymore. So we do usually add a little bit of sugar. And there's a lot of classic cocktail bars that will just slightly adjust this recipe with a hint of sugar. Because they've learned over the years, this drink's going to get sent back unless it's made for the modern palate. So don't feel beholden to any historical recipe. We like to talk about classic recipes because they're just really good to learn and really good to kind of balance you in your cocktail abilities. But feel free, to make them the way you like them at home.
That's what I always say. Don't let perfection be the enemy of making a cocktail.
Of enjoyment, right? Yeah. We're going to garnish this the only way we do at Shawn Michaels' house with a Luxardo chair.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah. Very beautiful.
Wouldn't want to upset the hosts.
I suggested it before the live stream. I said, can we please use the Luxardo cherry for this garnish?
Totally. Oh, hey, the audio level's coming in here. Somebody did some stuff.
That's great. We never stop improving over here. So thank you for your feedback.
All right, let's give this a go. Oh, yeah. So this is way drier, but there is a really nice kind of cherry grapefruit thing going on here. The rum there's a lot of tannin from the rum. I would actually prefer a lighter style rum for this drink specifically. We just didn't have one today. So I know, but it's okay. We'll fix it in post, probably. But yeah, so there's your two daiquiri variations.
Use it all in the photo shoot.
Totally. The photos came out great, though, right? I mean, I think we all saw that. So great. Let's talk about rums.
Rums.
Yeah, let's
finally,
talk rum.
rums.
Cool. So what is rum? Anybody know? Is there anybody in the audience that knows what rum is?
There's too much of an audio delay.
I know, right? Yeah. All right, so rum. Rum is a distillate from the byproducts of cane. So usually molasses. So if we're talking about molasses is the sugary part that you start the wort to make a really delicious distillate. So rum has its origins in a pretty sketchy time of human history. There was a lot of bad things that happened during colonization of the New World. I mean, we'll just leave that out because this is a very positive live stream. But suffice it to say, the English, the French, and the Spanish all spent a lot of effort to colonize areas of the New World. They brought just a lot of things, good and bad, to the New World. One of the things that was really great, they brought distillation. So it was here before that in Mexico and in some of the those areas with the Aztecs and the pre-Aztecs. But generally, the rest of the societies that were around weren't distilling much if it wasn't mezcal and ancestral spirits in Mexico. So yeah, they really brought modern distillation. I guess not distillation. They brought modern distillation to the New World. And they, instead of making whiskey, because they were around the Caribbean, they couldn't really, there was no real malt to speak of down there. They used the byproducts of processing cane. One of the biggest things and the biggest early exports of the New World was sugar to a very sugar-obsessed Europe. So they would grow a lot of sugar cane in a lot of the island countries that like Jamaica and Cuba and all these places. And they would process the sugar and send that to Europe. And they'd had all this sticky, resiny, like molasses left over from that whole process. And they started using that to distill rum. And they would send the rum around the world through the shipping vessels. They actually paid all the sailors in rum, which is where Navy strength rum comes from, because it was a way for them to test to see if their captain was watering down their pay. So it's one of the things.
You could light it on fire.
They would literally light it on fire to make sure the proof was high enough. If it couldn't light on fire, then there would be a mutiny. Yeah, there would be a mutiny going on. So that's really kind of the origins, I guess, of rum. And for the longest time, actually the biggest producer of rum was like Louisiana, which is crazy. That all the sugar plantations over there was a lot of rum being produced there. Jamaica with the Planter's Punch, that's where that originated. The English settled Jamaica, so their distillation methods and style ended up in Jamaica. the Spanish settled some of the islands around Cuba and that area, so their style of distillation was really prevalent there. The French colonized Martinique and some of the smaller French islands over there, French-owned islands over there, and their distillation methods carried through that region. There's the whole New World, including all of the states, was producing rum for the longest time. Those 13 colonies was definitely producing a lot of rum, as well as rye whiskey and apple brandy, actually. But yeah, so that's kind of a little history on rum. Nowadays, you have rum everywhere, and there's issues with rum because there's a lot less control and keeping consistent. Like if you think of bourbon, there's a very set rule structure on what bourbon is, right? It has to be aged for at least 2 years in new American oak that's been, hasn't been used before. It has to be, if it's bourbon, it has to be 51 or more percent corn in the mash. If it's rye, it has to be over 51% rye. So there's all these real, strict standards on what whiskey is in America. Same in Scotland with whiskey. Same with, gin has to have juniper in it to be called gin. So there's all these rules. With rum, it's kind of a free-for-all in a lot of countries. Like each individual country will sort of, try to control the product a little bit, but it's kind of the Wild West. So rum's kind of gotten a bad rap because it can be anything from something that's overly sweetened with a lot of caramel after the process, or it can be something that's really vegetal and interesting and very strong, like Martinique rum, or it can be really dundery, funky, like Jamaican rum. So there's all these different ways to make it. So when we're talking about Cuban rum, the original distillation method was in the Spanish style, but Cuba does a couple things that are very unique to Cuba. One of them is that their white rums, like if you think of the Bacardi style rum, right? It's a nice clear rum, really clean, clear. That's actually been aged for 3 years in the Caribbean, which is way different than aging it in other regions of the world where there's this high fluctuation between really hot summers, like let's say Kentucky, right? The summers in Kentucky are 110 degrees, and the rick house at the top floor of where they age all the whiskey, it can be 130 degrees up there during the summer, and then it can get down to almost freezing in the winter. Mm-hmm. So you're getting this heavy contraction every year from that barrel. So you're in the summer, it's expanding and it's absorbing a lot of whiskey, right? And that whiskey is able to really get into the nooks and crannies of the wood. And in the winter, it pushes it all out as it contracts, and it'll do it again and again over years. In the Caribbean, it stays at a pretty constant temperature, right? Like a really hot, humid temperature. So years in Cuba and in the Caribbean in general are just a lot softer. They don't impart as much wood flavor. It's more just finishing and smoothing. So in Cuba, they'll age for at least 3 years, and then they'll usually charcoal filter out all the color and most of the wood notes, like any wood notey flavors that have been imparted in there. They pretty much get most of that out, so it's just a really smooth, clean, clear distillate that's really great for cocktail mixing. So that's a very specific style for Cuba. You see that also in regions like Barbados, which were actually originally an English colony. In Barbados, there's kind of this dichotomy between more of the Cuban style that's kind of been influenced there as a lot of Cuban distilleries that want to export their products have had to move to other islands. But they also have a very unique English style distillation method as well. Like if you look at some of the more higher end Barbados rums, they're very English in style. If you go to Jamaica is very interesting because they have a natural yeast strain that's just naturally really funky. And they'll actually keep the vats open so they can acquire all that delicious flavor from the yeast that then can break down that wort, and then they can distill from there. And then beyond that, they also dig these dunder pits, which is another way of adding extra flavor. We'll get way more into that in a future rum episode. But suffice it to say, a lot of Jamaican rum can be extremely complex, dundery, funky. If you think of anything from St. Catherine, Dr. Bird, if you think of Rum Bar, that's a really funky, dundery Jamaican rum. But even if you just pick up an Appleton, there's little notes of some of the yeast strains. They don't really dunder. They don't really use the dunder method at Appleton much, but you get a little bit of the Jamaican funk. You'll definitely see it with Wray and Nephew. And then when you get to Martinique, actually the French method of making rum, they don't use the raw materials that are left over from the make of sugar. They actually use the fresh cane juice. So it's still green. It hasn't been cooked. They'll juice that cane fresh, and so you end up with this really grassy, because cane is a grass. You get this really grassy, earthy, like very ethereal. It's still kind of funky in that way because there's a lot of natural, fermentation that occurs within the green grassy goodness after they cut it. A very unique style of rum called Martinique or agricole rum, and that's what that is. It's an agricole product, right? The grass. They're like just cutting it fresh.
I never realized it's because they use the fresh cane.
Yep.
Because I've always I like savory, and so I enjoy.
Well, it's
that
a harder
grassy.
method. It's a harder method because you have to be really close to the growing fields. Like basically most Martinique rum, it's literally like there's a plantation house that has the still in it, and literally all around it is the cane. Because you literally have to cut it and you have to get it right through to juice as fast as possible to keep any funkiness, keep the funkiness to a minimum, right? Whereas if you're processing sugar and what's left over is the molasses, I think we've all been to the store and gotten a can of molasses that'll last you forever, right? And definitely there's such a high sugar content to that.
For 7 years.
Yeah,
I break it out every
very
fall.
hard to get anything to grow on it, right? So yeah, there's a totally different method, but it makes the finished product completely different, which is what's so fun, and that's why. And when I kind of referred to it earlier without really giving you a bigger, wider, net of what rum is. That's what's amazing about rum is that you can blend all the rums together to create something unique, right? So you can use something really clean and clear, like a Cuban style rum as a base. And then you can add in a little bit of a funky Jamaican. You can add a touch of Martinique, to give you that kind of grassy agricole nature. You can add in just a little bit of spiced rum or a spice syrup, because all those baking spices we think of, like clove and cinnamon and all these things, those are all Caribbean spices. So they all kind of belong in that that glass. They all belong in the cocktail pretty much.
So we have quite a few rums in use by all of you. We have Crusoe White Rum, Gosling's Family Reserve. I
haven't had the Family Reserve.
What is those dark rums? Do they have more of that? Why are they so dark?
Okay, so there's actually no dark. That's a good question. So there's no such thing as a dark rum.
Okay. Do tell.
Yeah.
What is this?
If they're dark, they've added a ton of caramel to it. And it's not caramel for sugar per se, although there obviously is sugar in caramel. It's for color. It's you can't, you would have to age rum for 30 years to get it to be as dark as a 5-year aged bourbon. Like I said, the aging takes so long in the Caribbean. That's why you see you'll see French owned rum companies. They'll age for 5 years in the Caribbean, and then they'll take it to France for 3, to finish it and actually get more wood into it. That's something that you see a lot. There's a lot of Foursquare rum in Barbados. They're doing a lot of more experimental things, and they'll send casks to other places to actually get more age on their rum. But yeah, that has been a problem with. It's been an issue in rum for the longest time, because a lot of rums are what in the business is called dosaged, which they add some caramel for a consistency of color across all their bottles, and it ends up. It can negatively affect the cocktail in ways. If you like a little bit more sugar in your cocktail and you don't mind that, it totally works. But it can be a little overpowering on some of the rums that are out on the market.
We got a couple other things, and we only have 5 minutes left on our live stream.
Okay, well, real quick, because I like the caveat with the rum thing. If you see a rum that says 23 on it somewhere, or 20 or 19, those are not years. They're lying to you. They're not allowed to say it's years. So if you look really closely and it says 23, it'll just say 23. It can't say
for no reason.
Yeah, because they want you to be 23 years, man, that's got to be really good rum. So be mindful of that. You're probably overpaying. I'm not saying that rum isn't good. I'm saying that you're definitely overpaying because they're trying to convince you that it's
They're trying to play off of your understanding of aged whiskey by selling you rum that seems better than maybe it really is.
And there is a difference between rum with an H.
I wanted to get that one.
Well, I mean, Rum is actually spelled differently depending on the region it's from, right? If it's a Spanish-speaking country, it's actually spelled R-O-N, ron, right? Because that is the Spanish name for rum. If it's R-U-M, that is the English name for rum. If it's spelled R-H-U-M, that is the French name for rum. So it's coming from a French island. Generally.
And so that would distinguish what that means from buying and a drinking experience is you're drinking a French style rum, R-H-U-M.
Yes, generally, yeah. I mean, I actually don't know of any rum that's actually spelled that way that isn't a French style, like agricole style rum. And you'll see that with rum that there's some experimental rums that are being produced in the States in that style, and they'll actually use that nomenclature as well. Sugar beets are absolutely used in rum. It's cheaper to produce than it's about the cheapest sugar you can get. And the French kind of coined that whole idea. They use sugar beets a lot. If you use any of the Giffard products, that's actually a sugar beet distillate, like a really clean distillate that they add all that beautiful flavor into all the Giffard flavors. But yeah, I would absolutely, I'll tell you that there's absolutely rum distilleries that you have to use some kind of cane, but you'll sneak in some beet sugar. And so there's a lot of issues with rum, and most rums are actually not being truthful about what they're doing. And we'll get into it in a future episode on some of the ones that
we're going to do a couple of deep dives into rums.
That we can be confident are actually legit, like honest rums. There's very few of them actually. That doesn't mean that you can't like what you like. But if you're trying to get something really, actual in style, like as close to like a perfect rum, it gets problematic in rum for sure.
One other thing I wanted to call out is I think it was, I don't remember who. Tom? No. I'm going to get it wrong now. One of you used a Demerara syrup, which I thought was just a very nice and appropriate choice. For those of you who don't know what a Demerara syrup is, it's basically using like unrefined sugar, what is it, sugar in the raw, right? Right.
Well, Demerara it comes from
it's a Demerara sugar.
Right, and it's named after a river in Guyana, right? The Demerara River, and it's the kind of sugar that you get from that region is unrefined and in more like it looks a little darker in color. It's way more unrefined, so you have a bit more texture, flavor.
That flavor in it.
Yeah, it gives you almost a little bit of that kind of molasses-y, funky goodness. It almost tastes like spiced in a way sometimes. It's a very magical syrup. I highly recommend using it.
It's very magical.
Yep. It can be hard to dissolve, so you just need to take the time to stir it a bit longer, use really hot water.
Okay, we've got about 40 seconds left, so quick question for Stefan. Okay. If you had to top a daiquiri with an Amaro, what would you add?
Yeah, use the daisy spec for that. So 1.5, 3/4 would be a good start. Maybe a bar spoon or a 1/4 ounce of simple. What Amaro would I use? Yeah. That's a great question because each Amaro can be totally different. With the daiquiri, if you want to keep it more like to a Cuban style, which is really clean and elegant, I would go with a lighter style of Amaro, something like Maletti or Montenegro is a good one. Definitely Nonino, I think, would be in that category. Something a bit more like citrus-driven and not overly like wooden or too bitter. Like I wouldn't use Shinar there. That's a little too savory. I mean, you can. Like, if you want that vibe, you absolutely can. But if you're like trying to keep to a classic, like as close to the classic recipe as possible, I'd go a little lighter in style.
We're going to have to save a lot of some of these questions.
Can we do a tiki episode soon?
Can we do a 5-minute Q&A?
Yeah.
5-minute Q&A, like after the yeah?
All right.
Stay on?
So we're going to wrap. Those of you who want to stay on for additional Q&A on rum drinks. For those of you who are like, let's just turn this off and make another rum cocktail or a daiquiri.
Oh, I will tell you, I've been a student of tiki for 15 years. So if you want, ask me your questions.
We're not going to get into tiki in this 5 minutes. We're going to do tiki another day.
Yeah. No, but I'm just saying, like, I've gone down the rabbit hole on rum.
Cheers, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks,
next
everybody.
episode is going to be the improved whiskey cocktail. We're going to do that next week.
My favorite.
So we're back to whiskey.
Cocktail.
Beautiful stirred drink.
That's not called a Negroni.
That is not the Negroni. So join us next week. We'll have a new guest next week, and we'll let you know who that is very, very shortly. And for those of you who want to stick around and keep talking rum, we've got another 5 to 10 minutes. Especially since I think we had those issues at the front of the
Yeah, right. We owe
it to you.
We owe them a couple more minutes.
So the next one is John Schmid.
Yeah.
And John Park are talking about overproof rums. I think rum 151. What is this? Overproof 151 rums. Sean's gonna.
Yeah, just take that drink.
Enjoy that.
What's the story with various overproof 151 rums? Okay, so there's a lot of islands in the Caribbean that don't drink like watered down rums, and one that I can think of absolutely is Martinique. They drink high proof agricole rum, and like the tea punch that's like generally like 120 proof rum in that or higher, like as high as they can distill it. Those guys they won't even use any water. They it's high proof rum, lime and sugar, and on a Friday they just get housed. Yeah, but it's so good. But we wouldn't, we're not used to drinking that way. We would not be able to stomach it. We wouldn't like it very much, and we wouldn't be able to hold our liquor.
Firewater.
Totally. So I mean, it exists in real world in the islands where they're made, drank by the people who make the rum. That is absolutely a thing. But if you're talking about like the classic 151 Bacardi or Lemon Heart more specifically, those were rums that were, pretty prevalent in tiki culture pretty early on to be used in small quantities, usually on top or usually for flaming and like pyrotechnic techniques.
You could float a little bit of that rum on top,
right?
Light it on fire, have this amazing experience.
And 151 specifically, the reason why it's that specific number is that is the legal maximum that you can sell in most of the states. There are like Virginia, there's a couple other states that you can, like Everclear is actually at a higher proof than that in other states. But here in California and most of the states that you guys are all hailing from, 151 is the legal maximum that you can sell booze. That's the highest proof. So yeah, that's why Bacardi, Lemon Heart, Everclear, like all those like high overproof spirits, that's the magic number. It's just like there's hundreds of thousands of spirits that are at 80 proof because that's the technical legal minimum or maximum that you can water down something before it's no longer a spirit.
I'm just the reason I've been smiling this last 30 seconds. I'm just thinking about all those videos that I've seen, and you can do that after this. Just Google YouTube like drinks on fire. Yeah,
151 Bacardi.
Because
they don't make anymore. They stopped making it because there was too many college kids burning their eyebrows off, or way worse.
If you don't get it all, I mean, if you spill it a little bit, like it goes all over the place. It can.
Yeah, but you can still find the Lemon Heart, and I don't know how Straw gets away with it, but Straw's actually like 160 something. I don't know how they do it. But
what state are they in? Not Utah.
I mean, I found it here, but I don't know how they do it. So,
I had a question actually.
I'll get back to you.
When you're talking about different styles of rums, so we talked about the distillation methods of the rum. French, English, and Spanish. But then we start talking about Cuban rum and these different things. If you're looking for a Cuban rum, what do you look for when you go to the store and you're like, I want to find
You're not going to get a Cuban rum, right? Because there's an embargo that's been on in Cuba
Cuban
for
style
forever,
rum,
right? They keep saying it's going to get lifted, and it just hasn't. And it's really sad because, like, it's time. And if you've ever been to Cuba, that country is stuck in, like, pre-embargo days, right? They haven't gotten a new car down there in 60 years. Like, they're just still fixing up, like, 40s cars. It looks like you're still stuck in the 40s in Cuba. So you can't really get a Cuban rum, but you can get a Cuban style rum, which is not hard to do. Obviously,
does it say Cuban style on the bottle? What do you look for?
I mean, what does Bacardi say? Right? They say something about Cuba, right? On the, Bacardi used to be the main distillery in Cuba, and after the embargo, they actually moved all their production facilities to Puerto Rico, and because it's an American colony, so they're able to import easily into the States. Obviously, the biggest producer of rum that sells in the States. They've adjusted their practices because in Puerto Rico there are no rules or regulations on rum production. So Puerto Rico is actually known to be the country with the most flavorless rums in the universe because they don't have any talk about sugar beets. They can do whatever the hell they want down there. So this product is still pretty good. This Ocho, but as far as like the regular superior, whatever they call Bacardi, it's not really my favorite. Especially, we live here in San Diego. I can go down the border and pick up a bottle of Havana Club, which is based off the original Bacardi recipe. That's actually from Cuba, right? Because they can import it into Mexico. And it's totally different. It actually tastes a whole lot more like the Real McCoy 3-year, which is actually from Barbados, from the same facility that, now it's just not on the tip of my tongue anymore, Foursquare is produced at. But they do it in a style very similar to Cuba, where it's aged for 3 years, and then they go ahead and charcoal filter that out. The other good one is Don Q. Don Q is a bit more true to Cuban style. So I highly recommend. That's super accessible here in the States. And then you can get into, if you can find some of the Hamilton rums. Ed Hamilton is a really rad guy. He's one of my favorite people. He's actually like one of the last rum pirates. He goes around, literally in the 80s, he would go around on a boat and just grab rum from places and sell them in the States. But he has his own brand now, and it's pretty readily available in larger markets.
It's one of the ones you recommend for the 15 bottle bar, right?
Yeah, exactly. He has a new product he's doing, which is a really delicious white rum called White Stash, because he has a big mustache, and it's really it's all white now because he's old. Really great rum, but all of his rums are great. If you get his Jamaicans, if you like dark rums and you like things like Goslings and stuff like that, try his Jamaican black or Jamaican dark, whatever. It's one of the only products he adds a little caramel to, and he does it on purpose because that's the style, and it's really delicious. It has that really kind of dundery Jamaican thing that has a really nice banana bread estery, quality from the yeast strain. So,
all right, last call for rum questions.
Yeah, who's got a rum question?
There has been so much in the chat. I've tried to keep up, but if I missed you for some reason, just drop
pop
it in there
right now. And yeah, John, Stroh and Lemon Heart are available. Lemon Heart goes in and out of stock because they keep changing distributors. So if you see one, just grab it.
Grab it.
Yeah, those are like tiki tool. This should be in the tiki toolkit for sure. Yeah, we should do a tiki toolkit, literally a tiki mug and a swizzle stick.
Tiki's one of those things that's you gotta plan for because there's so much there.
There's a lot going on for sure.
I actually had a question for John Schmidt if you're still around. You said you had over 30 rums in your bar. I was wondering, which ones did you end up deciding to use?
Yeah, I'd be interested.
And what have you found, since obviously you have a taste for rum, what have you found to be the perfect rum for your taste for your daiquiri?
For a daiquiri? Yeah, I'd be interested in that one too. That White Stash, the Real McCoy 3, the Don Q, obviously the 3-year Havana Club if you have a chance to get the one that's actually from Cuba. Bacardi's making a knockoff in Puerto Rico now that, it's better than Bacardi, superior for a daiquiri, I feel like. But if you side by side them against the Cuban product, it's not even fair. Tiki Toolbox. I like the name of that. That sounds cool. All my years in Tiki, I've never been I gotta grab my Tiki Toolbox. But I'm gonna use that now.
Yeah. And you'd have to make it in a little bamboo case or something, right? All right.
Yep.
It sounds like we are rum questioned out.
That's it? All right.
So that's it
no
for
rum
today.
episodes for the future. No, just kidding.
No more rum for you.
Yeah.
No.
We'll regroup. We've had a couple cocktails. We'll regroup on
that. It was fantastic. Join us next week for the improved whiskey cocktail. We just as a reminder, we're going to use this maraschino liqueur again. So if you didn't pick one of these up,
grab
we like to buy this in this smaller version. They have the really big version, but a little goes a long way. So,
look at how much we've been crushing Luxardo. We've already done a couple episodes on Luxardo, and we've barely touched. Because you use a bar spoon or 3/4, right? So
and there's another one that you recommend too. That's not the Luxardo. It's the
it's right on the tip of my tongue.
It's another one. It's in the 15 bottle.
I've had 2 daiquiris. Come on, you guys. Give me a break.
Have a great evening. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. It's always fun hanging out with y'all.
Bye.
Cheers.
All right.
Cool.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Did you get to the chair yet, Sean?
I already ate it. I can't stop smiling.